Governor Dean and Ralph Nader, as you'll notice, we don't have official clocks timing your responses because this isn't a presidential debate. We'd like to keep it informal. I just ask that you keep your responses as brief as you can, and if you go on, I will interrupt you and ask you to stop. Before we get going, we want to acknowledge the Annenberg Foundation Trust at Sunnylands for making this debate possible. Thanks, and let's get going. Historically, third parties have given us such reforms as the abolition of slavery, women's right to vote, the minimum wage. Governor Dean, do you believe that there is a value in third parties? Without third parties, don't we close ourselves off from change, innovation, and new directions?
I absolutely believe that. I think third parties have proved to be exceptionally helpful in changing the body politic in this country, because what happens is they rarely succeed. The only one that I can think of that succeeded in the history of the country was Abraham Lincoln, who was a third-party candidate of the Republican Party when it was a third party. And it was very important. However, this year we're threatened with an extraordinary emergency. We have the most far-right president probably in the history of the country. We have sent our troops to fight and die in a war in a foreign country without being told the truth about why they're there. We're running $500 billion deficits year after year after year. The extraordinary attack on the environment is something that I've never seen in my lifetime. And my argument is that we ought to unite behind a Democratic candidate who is progressive. We can argue about how progressive, but clearly progressive, clearly stands for a progressive income tax, clearly stands for attacking some of the corporate privileges that have been granted under this administration. My argument simply is, when the house is on fire, it's not the time to fix the furniture.
Mr. Nader, let's talk practical politics here for a minute. Many have suggested that you would have reached a wider audience with your message and would have had a stronger effect on policy if you had run in the Democratic primary rather than as a third-party candidate. So what advantages do you get from running outside the system instead of within it, and why did you make that choice?
It's called freedom. Freedom of conscience, freedom to authentically communicate the necessities of the American people without the trappings of special interest commercial cash, all kinds of lobbyists that hover and are inside the two major parties whose record has been dismal. They have gone along with big business, which is the real power in this country, to say no to universal health care, to say no to living wage for families, to say no for a fair tax system, to say no to get out of the war in Iraq. Howard Dean was an exception. To say no for addressing the major issue in this country, which is the domination of our country by a concentration of greed and power in the hands of multinational corporations that have no allegiance to our country other than to control it or abandon it as they see fit. How can that, plus really wanted to do something about poverty and the criminal injustice system and the failed war on drugs, how can all that fit inside a Democratic Party that has ignored year after year these important changes for a more just and prosperous America?
In the year 2000, a majority of Americans chose Al Gore to be their president, but Gore lost the Electoral College vote. Some people say he actually won that vote too, but lost the election in the Supreme Court. In any case, here's how you, Mr. Nader, analyzed your role in the 2000 election.
Well, in the year 2000, the Democratic pollsters' exit polls had me in the following categories. 25% of my vote would have gone to Bush, 38% would have gone to Gore, and the rest would not have voted. And now I think it'll be switched. I think now there'll be far more votes coming from independents and Republicans.
Mr. Nader, do you still believe that more Republicans will defect to you than Democrats? And how can your campaign bring Republicans into your fold if your running mate, Peter Cameo, is a former Socialist Workers' Party candidate?
First of all, he's a successful leader of the socially responsible investment movement and a successful investment advisor without shedding any of his conscientious defense of minorities in this country. Second, let me put it this way. Does anybody doubt that the Nader-Cameo ticket is being abandoned in droves by liberal Democrats? So obviously, since the polls are about a little bit ahead now than they were in 2000 for us, other people are filling in the breach. And when you look at conservatives and Republicans who are increasingly upset with President Bush about huge deficits, their dollars going to corporate subsidies and other corporate welfare, the big government Patriot Act, which they hate, the sovereignty destroying impact of WTO and NAFTA, and the softness on corporate crime. They lose their 401ks to corporate crime as well, and the federal regulation of local education districts, and you got to believe that out of 50 million of these people, we're going to draw away a significant number who will either stay home because we're taking the Bush administration apart in ways that the Democrats are afraid to or too indentured to, or they'll vote for the independent candidacy of Nader Camejo, Peter Camejo being the first Latino vice presidential candidate in modern American history.
Governor Dean, here is Mark Kamleiter, co-spokesperson of Florida's Green Party.
Nobody mentions that 250,000 Democrats voted for Bush in the 2000 election. It's easy. People want to find a scapegoat, and the bottom of it all is this. They don't believe that third parties should be involved in politics.
Governor Dean, is Mr. Nader responsible for the election of President George Bush, and will he be a factor this time around?
I think that what's gone is gone, what's done is done. I didn't begrudge Ralph Nader running in 2000 because he had a role to play, and nobody knew the election was going to be this close, and nobody knew how dreadful George Bush was going to be as a president. But Ralph, I think you're being disingenuous about your candidacy this year, and let me tell you why. You have 46% of all your signatures to get you on the Arizona ballot turned out to be Republican supporters. You accepted the support of a right-wing fanatic Republican group that's anti-gay in order to help you get on the ballot in Oregon. You have accepted one out of every $10,000 checks that you've accepted have been from people who've already given money to Bush Cheney. Your own organizer said in Virginia that you go to tractor pulls to try to get the signatures because they think they're doing Bush a favor. This is not going to help the progressive cause in America. And the thing that upsets me so much about this is you have the right to run. You can get in bed with whoever you want to. But don't call the Democratic Party full of corporate interests. They have their problems. We all have ours. None of us are pure. And this campaign of yours is far from pure. If you are willing to accept the help of a right-wing anti-gay group to get you on the ballot, you need to repudiate those people. And as your own running mate says, send back those Republican checks.
You really are engaging. You really.
And the applause.
Really
Just a second before Ralph Nader replies. Again, let's try not to have too much applause.
You're really being very inaccurate, apart from being unfair. We have not accepted the support of any anti-gay groups. We have not accepted as fulsomely the support of Republican dollars the way the Democrats have. The Democrat fat cats, Republican fat cats pour millions into each other's party to hedge the bets. And I think the issue here is the corporate government. Let's not be distracted by the two parties that are simply proxies. We don't want to settle for the lesser of two evils in our country. We don't want to have another special interest clone in Washington. We don't want to have another Washington insider who shifts back and forth with every poll. And we don't want to have an insensitivity for the plight of workers, American workers in this country, who have lost their manufacturing jobs. All those quotes come from Howard Dean the first against John Kerry in the primary campaign. What you're hearing now is Howard Dean the second, in a desperate attempt to smear our campaign, which is struggling to get on the ballot against the massive anti-civil liberties obstruction of the Democratic Party, which is the one that's really interfering with our campaign, not the press releases by Republicans who haven't produced any results.
That is also more disingenuous nonsense. The truth is that you told the people of this country that you were going to use volunteer help to get on the ballot in Arizona. You hired out that help, and that's why they made so many mistakes. That Public Citizen, which you founded, had earlier said this year that John Kerry ranks at the top of senators in standing up against political action committee money, which he has never accepted in his career, and lobbyist money. Not only has Kerry refused historically to take PAC money, but his record shows that he's been a leader for more than a decade in full reform of campaign financing, advocating for clean public money, not only for presidential but also congressional campaigns. My purpose here is not to smear Ralph Nader. You have
no, not at all.
Okay, okay, guys.
You have.
Okay, guys, let's bring some other people into this discussion.
Well, let me just finish